Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Kenny, and welcome to Ringside. Joe Louis here on ESPN Classic. We are coming to you once again from one of boxing's most historic sites, Gleason's Gym in Brooklyn, New York. When it comes to accomplishment, longevity, and popularity, no one matches up with Joe Louis. He won the heavyweight title in 1937 and defended it a record 25 times before vacating the title in 1949. Louis's championship reign was the longest of any boxer in history, regardless of weight class. But this son of an Alabama sharecropper made more than boxing history. He made American history. Amid the scourge of segregation, Louis's success in the ring was a beacon of pride for Black America, and his victory over Nazi Germany's Max Schmeling in 1938 made Louis a hero to all of America, a night that transcended boxing and sport itself. On our card for the next 6 hours, we have vintage Louis bouts from the Classic Library. We'll sprinkle some hidden gems from the archives, plus commentary throughout the broadcast from our distinguished panel. Joining me here at Gleason's, my co-host, boxing historian, cigar aficionado, and raconteur Burt Randolph Sugar. One of boxing's heavyweight legends, another heavyweight champ, George Foreman. Hall of Fame trainer and ringside regular Angelo Dundee. A boxing icon and championship trainer, Lou Duva. ESPN boxing analyst Teddy Atlas. And comedian and civil rights activist Dick Gregory. Plus, Burt Sugar's conversation with Joe Louis's son, Joe Louis Barrow Jr. Here are some of the historic fights on tap. The two epic contests with Germany's Max Schmeling that defined Louis's career. The loss in 1936 that almost derailed Louis's bid for immortality. And their 1938 World Championship bout, perhaps the most famous sporting event of all time, where for one extraordinary night in Yankee Stadium, the entire planet held its breath as two boxers faced off in a battle that symbolized the two sides of the war to come. We'll roll out Louis's ferocious bouts with a series of former world champions as he climbed the heavyweight ranks, from the Italian giant Primo Carnera to the fearsome Max Baer to the tough Jack Sharkey. With each fight, the young knockout artist demonstrated his amazing hand speed and uncanny ability to finish a fight when he had his man hurt. Some of Louis's most notable title bouts will also be showcased, from the opening bell to the final 10 count, including his 1937 title fight with the Cinderella Man, James J. Braddock. A difficult fight where Braddock was determined to keep his title from the young star.
Now Braddock's in the center of the ring, and Louis gave him emphatically down.
And we'll showcase the great fights of Louis's remarkable rule over the heavyweight division, including the 1941 Billy Conn slugfest at the Polo Grounds. The Pittsburgh Kid had the Brown Bomber reeling, but in one of the great comebacks, Louis turned the tables in spectacular fashion in the 13th round. Don't miss the brutal battle with British tough guy Tommy Farr. Louis hitting the canvas in bloody confrontations with one of boxing's first trash talkers, two-ton Tony Galento. Find out why Louis was booed after the colorful Arturo Godoy of Chile went the distance and won over the crowd at Madison Square Garden. Plus Joe's two titanic tussles with Jersey Joe Walcott, the second which ended with a vintage, vicious flurry. Also later, we'll cover Louis's return to the ring in 1950 and his bid to win back his title from Ezzard Charles. Plus, Louis's final fight with Rocky Marciano in 1951, a collision of heavyweight eras that concluded one legendary career and burnished the aura of the other. I'm Burt Randolph Sugar's all-time heavyweight list. Number one is reserved for Joe Louis. George, you're one of the all-time. You're on that list as well.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on Joe Louis being number one all-time?
No doubt about it. Way beyond his time. You see films of Joe Louis active now, and you would think that it's a future fighter, something to come. Always in position. You'd never see him out of position, throwing one combination, stumbling or running with a shot. I've never seen anything before or since Joe Louis.
You know, he too was, Burt, a huge star before he won the title. Even with the longest heavyweight reign, longest reign of in all the title defenses of any weight class, was a huge star in the Depression before he became heavyweight champion.
Well, what he was doing was stepping into a void. for the heavyweight division, it was sort of sending the clowns. After Dempsey and Tunney had retired, Tex Rickard, the promoter, had passed on in the late 20s. You now had the Primo Carneras, the Max Bears. I mean, there wasn't anything. There was no there in the heavyweight division. All of a sudden, out of the Midwest, starting in 1934, after he'd won the AAU Amateur Championship, comes this phenomenon, Joe Louis. Joe Louis Barrow, but Joe Louis. And he becomes the pawn, one hesitates to say, for control of Madison Square Garden between Mike Jacobs and those at Madison Square Garden, Jimmy Johnston. How so? Mike Jacobs, who had really been the ticket salesman behind Tex Rickard and given him all his money, he had ticket agencies throughout New York, thought he was going to get Madison Square Garden. He didn't get Madison Square Garden. So he now, rather than leaving his nose pressed against the glass, sets up his own promotional group, 20th Century. And he talks with the two managers of Joe Louis, Julian Black and John Roxborough, out of Detroit, about their young phenomenon, Joe Louis, and signs them, unbeknownst to Madison Square Gardens Corporation, which has the champion, Jimmy Braddock, and the champion before him, Max Baer, etc., and takes all the newsmen out to Detroit to see Joe Louis fighting Nady Mann, and they fall in love with him as a fighter. And this now becomes Max Baer's and Max Schmeling's biggest problem, because he's the roadblock that is under the control of Mike Jacobs. And Mike Jacobs uses him to get into Madison Square Garden. So you might say that Madison Square Garden is the house that Joe Louis built.
And behind all these political machinations is a guy who was just tearing people apart. Teddy, your thoughts on, and it's great that we do have footage of Joe Louis as a young man, but your thoughts on Joe Louis as a young fighter?
He had four assets to me that really made him great, and he was great. First of all, he had a great trainer, Blackburn. Blackburn was a hell of a fighter back in those days, and he did a heck of a job teaching him technique to go along. It's one thing having great talent, it just knocks down Galento, but it's one thing to have great talent, but you have to have the vehicle. It's kind of like, you know, you can want to go somewhere, but you need a car to get you there. Well, the car that gets you there is the technique. The technique is what allowed his talent to really shine. He could punch like hell, and he threw perfect punches. He threw everything short, everything straight. His technique was great. Probably nobody had better technique. And he was a great finisher. When he hurt you, forget about it. Say goodbye, because he got you out of there. And as George said, part of the technique, he was always in position. He always had his legs, and that came from his trainer teaching him. He always had his legs in position. He was never out of position. And there was one other thing that made it all come together, kind of like the concrete making all the bricks stick together. And that was how calm he was. He had the calmest demeanor. He never got frazzled. He was real calm, and you can ask George, when you're calm, you can think in there, you can relax in there, you can see things in there, and you can do damage in there. And Joe Louis did a lot of damage.
Hey, George, this is Joe Louis at the age of 20 taking on Lee Ramage in 1935. This is a 20-year-old heavyweight doing this, stalking a frightened, and rightfully so, Lee Ramage.
Yeah, he's green now, but what made him a magnificent fighter also was that he started off as a light heavyweight, same as Muhammad Ali. When the fighters start off as light heavyweights, they become better heavyweights because they still have that speed of thought, quickness of hand, plus they develop the power with it, and Joe Louis was one of those.
And Ramage was a top 10 when he fought him. And within a year, he is fighting top 10 heavyweights.
You see that left hook he just landed? I mean, that left hook was about 4 inches. It was already out. He already had his arm out, and he just turned it over. You know, he didn't start it from back. He just turned it over from where it was. He had great technique, great talent, and he was always calm.
You saw that picture in our little setup of Tony Galento, the little fat man. Who would say of Joe Louis, I'm weighted the bum, and Joe Louis just said, what's that little fat man's calling me a bum for? And when he got hit, you could see Galento go up in the air, and one of the writers, Bugs Bear, wrote, you could have counted 10 while he was in the air.
Let's go to Joe Louis's first big fight. This is against Primo Carnera, and again, Carnera, a former heavyweight champion of the world. You know, not going to make the top 10 list.
Bottom 10.
Sugar. Yeah, bottom 10 possibly. But here it is. So June 1935, Louis headhunting against the giant Primo Carnera.
Well, also, he had trouble with Canera only for about half a minute. And then he hit him with his first right hand. But Canera was trying to use his weight on him. I mean, Canera weighed 265 to 270. And Lewis just said in the fourth round, when Canera was pushing him around, he just picked him up. And that was it. He picked him up in a clinch.
But look at the
and
legs.
just lifted him.
Look at the legs of Lewis, how he's shuffling in, how he's always making sure his stance is there and his distance is right.
Well, Blackburn said it wasn't a shuffle, it was quote-unquote a purposeful advance. The critics said
Whatever
shuffle.
it was, it worked.
You know what's amazing, too, when you're watching this in the 1930s and you see the back and the shoulders of Joe Louis, like a guy that, that wasn't the weight training, maybe there was some resistance training or something. But this guy, I mean, what a phenomenon to look at, even physically, looking at him in this day and age.
Took their time and developed his body real slowly.
No, he was exactly what Mike Jacobs needed. And boxing was starved for somebody in the heavyweight division at this point. So yes, going all the way back to your original question, Joe Louis was admired. He was given the title Invincible because he was just walking right through, within a year, the top 10 heavyweights and then the ex-champions like Primo Canera.
All right, when we come back here, we'll have Louis with more of his hand speed and the punching power against the heavyweight champions, Max Baer and James J. Braddock. Plus, we'll have the historic fights with Germany's Max Schmeling.
Well, folks, this is the cub of the family, Buddy Baer. He's only 6'6½", weighs 256 pounds, 18 years old. He's going to take the place of Canera in my training camp. How about it, Buddy? Oh, boy. Oh, let's go, let's go.
What about you and Joe Louis?
Joe Louis? Oh, well, that's another fight, Bud. I'll tell you one thing, I'm working hard. Look at the hands. Blisters? Boy, I'm getting in shape up here in the mountains, I'll tell you that. And boy, and for the first time in his ring career, the expression on his face is going to change. Now, you wait and see.
Fascinating stuff, as Max Baer at that point is the former heavyweight champion of the world, getting ready for the rising star Joe Louis, who would be 24-0 when he took on Max Baer. All right, Bert, tell us about Max Baer. He's got personality. You can see it there. It radiates personality.
Oh, he was a clown. He was a happy-go-lucky fella, nothing like you saw, by the by, in Cinderella Man. I think that painted a very bad picture of him. He had been in a movie. The movie was Prize Fighter and the Lady with Myrna Loy. He acted, he danced, even before this. In his fight with Primo Canera, at the weigh-in, he went up to him while he stood on the scale and started picking his chest hairs, going, she loves me not. He loved jokes. He loved fun. He was not a villain by any means. Max Baer was probably one of the highlights of a very depressing era called the Depression. But he was always a lot of fun. And he really had fun. In the Canera fight, by the by, he knocks down Canera 11 times. A couple times Canera pulls him down and he's hollering, last one up's a sissy. I mean, he's just out there.
This is a mess, by the way. I mean, Bert, Angie, this is why is this such a farce, Angelo?
It's not a farce. Poor Joe Carnera got nailed with that first right hand. Never was the same again, and all Baer did was keep pushing him. But this ruined Max Baer because he was grabbing Baer, bringing him down with him. He really ruined him. And Braddock, that's why Braddock licked the guy later on.
You think so? Explain that. Why? I mean, how is he ruined by drilling Carnera like this? Was he getting hurt going down?
If you were Carnera, wouldn't you grab? Because he was falling, so maybe help me. Don't let me fall down by myself.
Now, that right hand that he's hitting him with, by the by, was lethal. He killed Frankie Campbell in the ring, Dolph Camilli, the Brooklyn Dodgers brother who changed his name. He had so injured Ernie Shaft that in the next fight against Canera, he fell down.
How did that affect
dead.
him, Bert? How did that affect him?
It did affect him. Bear was sensitive despite his madcap, and that was one of his nicknames, Madcap Maxie. And when he had lost the title in his previous fight to the Lewis fight against Jimmy Braddock, when they came in to interview him, they said, what happened, Max? What happened? He said, I don't know, but Jimmy has 3 kids. I'm happy for him. I don't know how many I have. This is no villain, I assure you.
Now, Angelo trained by Jack Dempsey at one point as he's getting ready for this fight. How did he link up with Jack Dempsey?
Well, you know, I didn't realize Bear was so big, because Dempsey's not a midget. And he looked small compared to Bear. When he was there, Bear stood tall, and he looked much bigger than what he was. But Dempsey would bend, but Dempsey was a tall guy.
Here they are actually have a little sparring, a little friendly sparring, I would guess. And Dempsey's about, what, 40 years of age
He's 40
at this
years
point,
here.
Bert?
And he's his manager. He's his trainer and manager. He had promoted him in Reno, Nevada, and now he's his manager. And I guess this is what managers do, isn't it, Angie?
Well, I don't know about that. I don't want
Jack
to get in the
Dempsey,
ring
yeah.
with that guy. I'd get myself hurt.
It's great old footage, once again, Jack Dempsey with Max Baer. How powerful a puncher was he, Angelo, Max Baer?
Tremendous puncher, because he was up tall, throw his whole body behind the
like
right
Adonis.
hand,
But a right
and he
hand
was
only.
loose as a goose. No big muscles, fluid, boom, and he nailed you. Because he was nailing you from on top. He was fighting a lot of smaller guys, and when he nailed them, chopping them down, he hurt them.
September 24th, 1935, Bert, Yankee Stadium. Joe Louis is 24-0. Baer is 40-8. And here we get to see, again, this is Joe Louis in his prime. Maybe you say pre-prime, but this guy is lightning fast. Let's pick it up here in the first round.
Well, what you're saying is the only stand of Max Baer here. Before the fight, despite all his palaver, and we saw some of it in the film, how he's going to change the expression on Joe Louis's face, Max Baer in the dressing room is hollering, I'm out of breath, I can't breathe. I.e., I don't want to go on. He's
Anxiety.
He's telling Jack Dempsey, who says, you go out there and get your beating, or I'll give it to you here in the dressing room. And he does put up a little bit of a stand. He does hit Louis several times, as you'll see. And then watch what happens. That only catches Louis's attention.
Max would make his stand, and this is Max's first fight, Max Baer's first fight since losing to James J. Braddock and losing the heavyweight title.
Which he just frittered away. He was waving to a blonde in the audience the whole fight. And here he lands a couple punches, chasing, you know, Louis, who's... Joe Louis had an interesting style. He would always be in the right position to throw a punch. He would always be there. If you were out of reach, he wouldn't venture a punch. He wouldn't reach for you. He would always have to have you within the ambit of how far he could reach. And he's trying to set it up. And Baer is so big, he's got to take a couple extra seconds. And here goes Baer, nailing him. Watch what happens. Well, okay, enough of that, says Joe. Boom, bop.
Wow. So that sent the message.
More than a message.
Yeah, that's, well, he's lucky he's on his feet at that point.
That was an army of singing telegrams.
Max makes his stand there. Angelo, tell us about the economy of energy and motion with Joe Louis. Your thoughts on his style.
What I'm watching is a science of boxing, showing how a smaller guy can out-jab a guy, big guy. And that's what he's doing there. Also, I'm a little mad about this because I thought Muhammad invented the glove on the head, but that sucker Max Baer invented it.
Now they're back in the corner, and again he's telling Dempsey, I'm out of breath, and Dempsey just shoves him back out into the ring, just like Angie shoved out Muhammad Ali in the Liston fight, then Cassius Clay. He just shoves him out. The hell with it. Get out there.
The other thing, Bert, is that amazing the right-hand shots Joe Louis is taking. Later on in his career, he was wobbled by right hands. Schmeling. Now look at the shots he's taking, and he's not even budging. That Joe Louis was tremendous.
By the way, this is nearly 85,000 people at Yankee Stadium. This is a big event. It's a big gate, biggest gate since Dempsey-Tunney
And
in
remember,
boxing.
and Depression dollars, too. I mean, that's not unimportant. That there was no money on the land, and they ponied it up for this fight because Baer Louis was a big fight.
He's wearing the Star of David. Bert, how religious was he?
Well, it was the high watermark of Jewish fighters, the Barney Rosses, the Maxie Rosenblums, etc. But I once asked Ray Arcel, the sainted trainer, was Maxie Bear Jewish? And he said no. I said, how did you know? He said, I saw him in the shower. So let's just say an eighth.
Jewish in his family at some time, but not Jewish. But it was more marketable to be Jewish.
At that day and age, yes.
Yeah.
And you know, you had him, Bob Pastor, who would fight Lewis later, etc., etc. But Max Baer had been a tremendous fan favorite. They even had the first Gillette sponsored radio show for him, Lucky Smith, and they sponsored it. And they had Your Name Is Dog, the Larimore, because he was from Larimore, California, Gay Blade, because it was Gillette Cavalcade of Sports, Gay Blade, you get it?
Yeah, I get it.
And all of a sudden they find after he loses to Braddock, he ain't got much of a property.
Right, right. But here he is, and he's fighting Joe Louis, and again, made his stand there in round one. Actually got aggressive there in round two. We're going to take a break. When we come back, again, Max Baer, first fight since losing the heavyweight championship, taking on the rising star Joe Louis. This is Classic Ringside. We're back at Gleason's Gym right after this. Welcome back to ESPN Classics Ringside. Joe Louis from Gleason's Gym. So former world champion Max Baer presenting a challenge to the undefeated Joe Louis, taking some shots, but he had a 12-pound weight advantage and still had power in that right hand. First two rounds, though, Louis had battered Baer around in front of the record crowd at Yankee Stadium. How much more could he take? Let's go to round three.
All right, Ed Hill. Max took his time coming out of the corner, adjusted his trunk. They worked on his face considerably in that period between the second and the third rounds. We're going into the third round. Lewis is stepping backwards, fiddling around. He gave Max a left to the jaw then. Max seems to have gained confidence with that flurry of rights and lefts that he indulged in at the close of the other round. And now Lewis is stepping back. Max is trying to cock that right. He's crouched low. Both his right against his chest. He led with his left and got Lewis on the chest and tried with the right, but it missed. Lewis jabbed him, and now Max brought a right and a left. Now Baer's crouching low. He tried to bring up a right uppercut in a short clinch there against Lewis. Lewis turned him against the ropes. He gave him two fast left jabs in the face. Lewis is forcing the fighting at this moment. He's got Baer back in his corner, but Baer wiggled out of there, and he's out in the center of the ring, standing straight as usual. He's got his right hand cocked against his chest, ready to shoot, but Lewis keeps shooting in that left to his face and keeps him pretty well off balance. Lewis is shifting, dancing. Now Baer is crouching very low, and he got a left in the face, right eye on the jaw, another one just under the eye. And Lewis steps back. Max is bearing him towards this corner. Max got another left in the jaw. And now Baer is crowding Lewis over to the other side, but Lewis continues to poke that left in his face. There was a left straight in the mouth, and another one. But they're not hard, just light, but just enough. And then Max brought up a fast left uppercut that caught Joe, but apparently did no damage. No expression on his face yet. Lewis drove in a left to Max's face, and he gave him a hard right to the jaw. Another left to the face. Another left to the face. One right on top of that. And Baer then shot a left, but it missed. Joe shot another left, and it landed. Now they're in close quarters, and Joe let him have two fast ones in the stomach. Baer tried for right and left to the body. Now a left to the jaw, and Lewis shot a hard right to the jaw. 2, 4, 5, left and right. 7, 8, 9, rights and lefts to Baer's jaw, over against the rope, and there was a hard smash to the head, and Baer is down from a hard left hand to the jaw. Count is 6, the count is 7, the count is 8, and Baer is coming up. He's standing there with his legs wide apart. Lewis comes in, gives him a left to the face, now a right to the jaw. He misses, and Baer is down again. There's the count of 1. He's sitting on his haunches, one leg cocked under him, and the bell saves him. Wiggle. And there's the bell. The fourth round is on. There comes out slow. Lewis leads over to him, and he's fiddling around now with that left hand. He jabbed him in the face. Baer returned to left. He got another jab in the face from Lewis. Now Lewis is again leading with that left. and he gives it to Max again, but it's high. Max ducks under it. Then Max led with a left for the body, but it was short, and Lewis gave him a left that went over the shoulder. Now Bear is backing against the rope slightly. No, now Lewis comes in with a left, and Bear gives him a left. Bear got another left to the mouth. Now then Lewis there got a left over to the face, but very light. Bear is crouching low, very low. He's got his right hand cocked against his chest, trying to lead with the left. Lewis has got his hand to it. Now he came in fast, and he gave Bear a fast left hook to the stomach, and then he gave him a left jab to the face. And now Lewis gave him another, and he right uppercut him. He followed a left jab to the face with a right uppercut, and Bear backs away. Now Bear's in the center of the ring. Lewis is coming again to him with his hands close to his body. He gave Bear a left. The right is ready at all times there. He gave him a hard right to the stomach, and then a hard left to the stomach, and Bear went into a clinch. Lewis pushed him away. Bear is turned and went to the other side of the rope, but he got a hard right to the face, and then a left as Lewis came into him. Now Lewis gave him a left to the face, and then he missed with a right, but right over the belt line, and he shot a right backhand across. It looked like a backhand from here across Lewis's face, but it did no damage. The referee warned him. Now Lewis is in close, and he gave him another left jaw, left to the jaw, and Max is in close now. Head to head for a brief second. It looked like it might be one of those good old exchanges. But no, Max straightened up, and Lewis gives him another left. Now Lewis is in close, and Bear ties him up, and Lewis is backing away, but he comes in on Bear. They're right above me as I talk now. Bear with his back to me, and Lewis gives him two left jabs. The Bear once more. Lewis leads with a left, and Bear has got his hands back close against him. Now and then he sticks out. He ducks his head back that time, and he got a left, good stiff left jolt on the chin. And now he missed with a left that Lewis ducked and went under. Lewis gave him a left full in the face, a left over the eye. Lewis another left, and Lewis is ready with that right at any instant. Now they're out there in the middle of the ring fiddling. Neither one has made a move for about 5 seconds, and then Lewis jabbed him with a left. Now Lewis is following up another left. All these lefts are light, but there came a fast right, a right swing right across the gut, and Max high on the jaw, and Max went into a clinch. The referee orders them to break. They're over here against the ropes. Max has got his back, and he took an awful right, and then a left to the jaw, and he has gone to his knees. He's down, and the count is 4, 5, 6. Bear is on one knee. 7, 8, 9. Bear is not up, and Bear is on his knees at the count of 10. Your fight is all over.
After the fight, this is what Max Bear had to say. I would have struggled up once more, but when I get executed, people are going to have to pay more than $25 a seat to watch it. Now, here's what Grantland Rice, the renowned sports writer, had to say about this fight. Quote, Max Bear left the primrose path, wandered into the jungle, and nearly lost his life when he happened to run into a jungle cat named Joe Louis, the greatest fighter of his generation. Bear finished his career on his knees, the worst beaten and most badly battered heavyweight that ever came to the end of the road. Bert, this is just indicative of the, I mean, it's stunning, and you look back at all these accounts of the, you don't say, it's racist. I mean, it's not even racist overtones, it's downright racism when referring to Joe Louis.
You have to understand, it was 1935. What we view today wasn't then. What he was saying above and beyond our picking words out was that Joe Louis was invincible. Grantland Rice wrote this way. Metaphorically, he's totally wrong by our standards.
Well, but by any standards, Bert, when you look back at a lot of things that were written about this man who was more seen as an animal, saying that this is not a human. I mean, that's what's really being brought out.
I guess so, but I also can give you what Max Bear said in the dressing room, and you want to view it by today's standards. He says, I'm not a fighter. I never was a fighter, as he stood there complaining or even admitting of the beating he got. He said, I'm nothing but a pansy. Now, what do you want to make of that by today's standards? There was a different set of circumstances and a different set of languages. That's all I'm saying. Yes, it's racist. 2006. No, 1935. I also
racist in 1935 as well, Bert. I mean, it was if you're referring to someone as someone who's part of the, who's part animal, which was not, and this is not only one case, but it's certainly not the worst case that's out there in reputable journals.
I put to you that he's drawing the ink blot you're deciphering. It's a Rorschach test more for you than him. I don't think it's racist. By 35 standards. You have to understand, Joe Louis was a phenomenon. Yes, he was black, and it was unusual to see a black heavyweight after Jack Johnson had almost polluted the pool. Joe Louis had come along, and he was something that was a revelation. They had never seen anything like this. The fact that he was invincible, if you saw this, right up, take out those words for the moment. We'll get back to him. I think Joe Louis was all of a sudden something that they had no idea how to write about him. He had just taken care of 2 former heavyweight champions, Bear being the second after Canera. His punching power was unbelievable. He had knocked out Max Bear, the first time Bear had ever been knocked out. He later said it was like trying to take a brick out of a wall. I mean, that's how hard it was. Granlund Rice, the others, yes, there were terms.
There's 2 separate things going on. Yeah, there's that one, and then there's also watching the phenomenal Joe Louis on the way up and cleaning house.
They didn't know how to address him as something in an era that had never seen anything like him.
All right, let's take a look at the knockout once again. Joe Louis coming in, and Max Bear at this point, first fight since losing the title. And it's interesting, Bert, when you come back in round 1, where Bear starts to flash that power, except it's not working. Angelo, break down the punching power and the style of Joe Louis here.
Steady. You know, and the verbiage used before, you use that adjective animal when you describe a tough sucker that gets you out of there. It's not an adjective you like say something derogatory about somebody. It's fight talk. But what's happening there, Joe Louis destroyed Max Bear. What a shot.
Maybe he should have stayed in the dressing room and fought Dempsey.
Could he
have done worse?
And he kept getting back up. You know, it was a funny line when he said, you know, I get executed.
You're going to have to pay more than $25.
Right. And yet he still kept getting back up.
Well, remember, he'd never been knocked out before. And he had fought, you know, every tough fighter of his day and era. Joe Louis was something beyond that.
Joe Louis is also 25-0. Let's take a look now. After the fight, this is something else. The star power of this event, bringing out the biggest names in show business. Here's Lou Costello after the fight.
You know, for 2.5 years, Matt, a lot of people have been calling me a bad boy. Tonight, brother, you take it. You're a bad boy.
Thank you.
And so are you.
I'll say Joe's proven that in his last 8 or 10 fights. He's a bad boy. Tough boy.
Joe, would you really like to meet Matt again?
I would like to. We're very good friends, though, but I'd like to fight him.
You think, Rascal, you think you'll meet him in September?
I think so.
Well, the way he fought tonight, I really think you 2 boys have got an engagement in September.
Liz, you want to meet him again? Well, sure. No, Max is like, no, I don't want to meet this guy again. There's no rematch here.
Did you know Lou Costello had been a professional featherweight? Featherweight.
Really?
Out of Paterson, New Jersey.
Before he got a few extra meals in him. Right. But he was a fighter.
He had been a fighter, yes, and there's a statue to him in Paterson with 1T, New Jersey. He had been a fair fighter before he found show business, vaudeville.
All right, of course, Lou Costello there talking about the shot at the title and James Braddock, but something would happen on the way to the heavyweight championship. We'll take a break, but when we come back, Max Schmeling, former heavyweight champion of the world, would get his shot at Joe Louis before he could get a shot at the title. We'll have that fight for you and much, much more. It's Classic Ringside, Joe Louis here at Gleason's Gym.
The camera highlights in the world of sports. Big shots of the boxing world. Matt Fleischer, editor of Ring Magazine, doles out trophy belts. First, Tony Canzoneri, lightweight king. Next,
Tommy Lockwood, this is yours for 17 years of honorable service in the ring. Jimmy Braddock, this is presented to you for having won the World Heavyweight Championship. And Joe Louis, 146 boxing writers in this country have voted you as having done most for the sport in 1935. Now, boys, how about? Let us say happy birthday for Joe, his 22nd birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.
it's lucky that your livelihoods don't depend on your singing. You'd all starve to death. Stripped for action, the Brown Bomber takes on one of his 6 sparring mates as he begins training for his clash with Max Schmeling. Watch that left, it's loaded. Champion Jimmy Braddock has a word.
By the way, Joe, I may be having an appointment with you sometime this summer or fall, maybe in September or October.
Okay by me.
The acting ability. He's no Max Bear as an actor. As a fighter, better, but not as an actor, Joe Louis.
Do you know that they had trouble getting sparring partners for Joe Louis, no kidding. And they were paying him $25 a day. They finally, because some of them weren't good enough for dogging it, they finally paid him $15 a round.
Wow.
Just stay in there, please. We need the sparring.
So there's James Braddock, the heavyweight champion of the world, and now Max Schmeling comes over to fight Joe Louis, and this would have the #1 contender. One would believe that this would produce the #1 contender.
Well, but in some people's mind's eye, this was supposed to be just another one of the ex-champions Louis after Carnera and Louis after Bear was going to beat.
Where is Max Schmeling right now in his career, as of 1936?
Washed up.
He's
lost
seen as
to
washed
Steve
up.
Hannes.
Yeah.
He's lost. And not only that, here he is getting knocked out a little earlier by somebody named Max Bear.
1933.
Yes, this is the battle of the Maxes, maximum and minimum. What you have, though, is...
That didn't match up, but it's still funny. Go ahead, Bert.
Oh, thank you. Max Schmeling comes over. He's a 10-to-1 underdog. They're asking Joe Louis what round he's going to beat him in, not will you win. And not only that, they're looking for, at the Journal American, somebody, because they've got a whole page, experts pick. Remember, Nat Fleischer said 146 boxing writers. Would that there would be 146 boxing writers today. But nobody is picking Max Schmeling for that side of the page. So what they do is, Bill Farnsworth, the editor of the Journal American, says to his son, who is a copy boy, you just pick Max Schmeling. He said, what? You pick, we're putting your name in. This kid became an instant celebrity because he's the only person in New York who picked Max Schmeling.
So at this point, again, Joe Louis is a huge star, and I think people might lose sight of that, Bert, where Louis, before he even wins the title and goes on to have the longest reign in heavyweight history and 25 title defenses, is just a national star, a national hero on the way up. Now, his training was said to be suspect. Did it just reach that level, as we've had conversations with George Foreman, where the arrogance kicks in, where you believe, I have so much power, how hard do I really have to work?
Oh, yes, in part, particularly for this fight. He wouldn't listen to his trainer, Jack Blackburn, better known as Chappie. He found the game of golf, which is the wrong game for a golfer, for a fighter, because you're holding your hands low, which is exactly what he was doing, his left hand. He was out on the dance floor. There were even rumors that he was running around with women, not his wife, thank you. All things that meant he wasn't training for this fight. He had just overlooked it. Max Schmeling, I'd beaten Max Bear, who beat Max Schmeling. I'd beaten Primo Carnera. You know, why should I have to really get up for this fight? But Schmeling, in the Polino Yuzgadan fight right before, where Louis had knocked out Yuzgadan with one punch, had seed something, as he said to the press, but I'm not going to tell you.
I
what.
seized something, yes.
Yes. Now, there's one other side story to the Schmeling-Louis fight. Jack Johnson, former champion, who is now persona non everything, and he and Jack Blackburn hate each other. They had fought each other way back when, in the first decade of the 20th century, because Blackburn was a hell of a fighter, had 103 fights, fought Langford, Gans, Jack Johnson, and he wanted to be the trainer, and he went in and told the two managers, John Roxburgh and Julian Black, I'll train him, meaning Louis. And Blackburn said, get that guy out of here. Well, he now goes to Ring magazine, edited by Nat Fleischer, whom we saw in that clip, and writes a whole story of how Joe Louis is going to lose and Schmeling win, which does not endear him to the black community.
He repeatedly was not in Joe Louis's corner. I mean, it wasn't just this one incident. I mean, that was, I think, surprising to a lot of people that you would see, if you look back on history and you see, wouldn't you think Jack Johnson would be solidly behind the new young black champion? He was not.
No, he was jealous of the fact he had wanted to be, if not the only, at least the star of the division for African Americans or then blacks. But this fight was thought to be so one-sided despite Jack Johnson. There was a story, Jimmy Cannon, who turned out to be Joe Louis's best friend as a writer, had a choice, go to the Schmeling-Louis fight or take the first road trip with the Yankees that season, 36, because they had a new outfielder named Joe DiMaggio. He went on the road trip because he didn't think this was going to be any fight at all.
Angelo, how difficult is it for even a guy at the very top, and the top of the heavyweight division in this case, to stay that way in training camp and keep motivated? Because clearly Joe Louis did not stay motivated for this fight.
Toughest profession is being a fighter. I mean, the sidebar, everybody coming around, I can teach you better. I tell my kids in the gym, next guy comes up to you and offers you $1 million, tell him you got to chop it up with me. I got to get 10%. This happens with a fighter. You can't stop it because, let's face it, but what I engendered from this, Max Baer invented the backhand. And he invented the rabbit punch. See that? I'm learning
you couldn't
so
do
many
that back
things.
then, by the way,
I
could
swear
you?
to God, it's beautiful.
You couldn't, but he did. Was seemingly you could.
You couldn't, you did.
Yeah, and yet seemingly he was doing that.
The other thing is, Joe would not have been good in our era now, because you guys want to talk to the star. You don't want the fighter to do the talking in the ring. Kids today got to talk to you guys, or they're buried.
No, Joe Louis.
There's no ESPN.
Joe Louis coming up. His managers set up a set of regulations so that he would not in any way be like Jack Johnson, who had caused a great public reaction to him. He wouldn't gloat over a fighter that he had beaten. He wouldn't be seen with a white woman, no matter if it was a group picture. There was a whole list of things, including he couldn't be pictured or seen eating watermelon because of its being a symbol of what it was, even though it was Joe Louis's favorite food. So Joe Louis was, as Angie said, he was not going to say anything that was out of place because he was dedicated to boxing and his two managers to not having him emulate or in any way remind anybody of Jack Johnson.
So once again, Joe Louis unbeaten, on the way up, seemingly invincible, 27-0, 23 of those wins by knockout, taking on the former champion of the world, Max Schmeling. Again, few expected Louis to have much trouble. There'd be a lot of trouble for Joe Louis. Let's pick it up, 1936, June 19th, here at Yankee Stadium.
There's the bell, and they step out, both men cautiously, and there's sparring around in the center of the ring there. Neither man, Louis lashed out with the left hand, but very light, just lashed out with the left, and Max Schmeling sent over a hard right, but it was short. Once more, this sparring in the center of the ring. Schmeling backed up a few feet on him there. Louis is in the center, both men cautious. Neither one has shot but 1 or 2 blows apiece so far, and they've gone about 15 seconds. Still there, and Louis led with the left, but was very light. Max Schmeling tried with the left also. No damage done. He has colored Schmeling's eyes just a trifle. And once more, Louis lashed out with the left hand that caught Schmeling, but not hard. Schmeling tried with the left, and he came in close in a clinch. They're both trying the 4 light uppercuts, but no damage done, and quickly broke at the command of Donovan. Louis stands in the center of the ring. Schmeling is over near Mike's neutral corner here. Schmeling tried with the left, and then he came through with a hard right to the body, but Louis tied him up, and they're in the center of the ring once more. Now Schmeling in the center of the ring. Louis over toward his own corner. Louis lashed out with one of those fast lefts, just like it had the speed of a Buick there, but it hasn't yet produced the power. And once more, Schmeling in the center of the ring. Louis lashed out with the left hand, but was short. Schmeling tried with the left, and Schmeling tried with the right, but was short. Louis was back out of the way from it. No ducking. He didn't duck, just stepped back and was about an inch away from the punch. Louis tried with the left hand, but it was short, and Schmeling came in under and tried with the left. There are 2 lefts, but they blocked each other at arm's length. Once more, Louis in the center of the ring, Schmeling over close to the ropes, and they're sparring and weaving both gently. Now Louis with the left, feinting. No, neither man will leave. Louis tried, and then at close quarters, he came in with a hard right to Schmeling's. The back of Schmeling's head was right behind his ears. And there, at the bell, Louis brought up a hard right uppercut.
More of the 1936 Joe Louis-Max Schmeling fight ahead. See how the heavyweight from Germany became the first man to floor the bomber. Then the historic rematch. Joe Louis lets his fists do the talking and silences the Nazi propaganda machine.
Right to the body, a left up to the jaw, and Schmeling is down.
Also ahead, Louis becomes the first black heavyweight champion since Jack Johnson. Longtime social activist Dick Gregory with ringside commentary on how Joe became a symbol of the civil rights movement. And don't miss trash-talking 2-ton Tony Galento sounding off. He'll moy to the bum. The rotund contender stuns the champ with a series of left hooks. All ahead on Ringside. This is Ringside, a marathon of Joe Louis big fights. We return to the 1936 bout against former heavyweight champion Max Schmeling. It's round 4 at Yankee Stadium. Here's Clem McCarthy.
Snelling comes forward. Lewis meets him, and there.
And there at the bell, Snelling stepped out slowly to the center of the ring. Lewis came just as cautiously, and in the center of the ring, they're both sparring and feinting with left hands, but nothing doing yet for about this first. They've been in there 8 seconds now, and not a blow has been landed. Each man feinting with his left. Lewis tried 3 times there with the left to draw Snelling in, but no chance. Snelling stepped back. Then Snelling led with a light left to the face, but no power behind it. And now Lewis shot a hard left to Snelling's jaw, and in return, Snelling got over a left to Lewis's jaw, and then a right to that was intended for the jaw, but missed and slid off his shoulder. Now in the center of the ring, Lewis with Snelling over in the other neutral corner, and Lewis let him have a light left hook high on the ribs. And back in the center of the ring, Snelling led with a left but was very low, and he didn't try to finish the blow. And to step back to the center of the ring, Lewis keeps following him up and watching carefully. No change in Lewis's expression. There he got out that straight left. Snelling backing away cautiously, waiting for some opening that he wants. And Snelling got over a right hand high on Lewis's jaw that made Lewis rock his head. Snelling has sent Lewis down. No, Lewis is down. He did not wait for the count. He got up on the count of 2. Snelling came back at him and gave him another right. Snelling is pouring in now, and Lewis for the first time is getting the real test. Snelling gave him another right to the jaw. Snelling has put in 4 rights to Lewis's jaw. They're on the other side of the ring, with Snelling following him as quick as a cat, and all the power of a Buick in those right hands. Snelling's right hand is going to tell the story of this blow for Snelling, win or lose. And at the bell, they're still trying to fight. Snelling resented. Lewis trying to come through.
For the first time in his career, Joe Louis was on the canvas, courtesy of Max Schmeling's big right hand. He didn't stay there long, bouncing back up immediately. But bedlam had erupted around Yankee Stadium. Suddenly, the crowd and Schmeling sensed an enormous upset was possible. We'll have more of the epic first encounter between Joe Louis and Max Schmeling when Ringside Joe Louis continues on ESPN Classic.
Now, there's the bell. They step out. And Lewis is slow to come from his corner. Blackman giving him one last caution. Schmeling shoots a hard, fast right to Lewis's face. Another to Lewis's face. Lewis is a dazed, tired, bewildered fighter, and Snelling is fighting him to the side of the ring. Lewis is right above me, and he's a tired-looking fighter. Snelling has all his well-known stamina. He there led with 3 straight lefts, Lewis did, and Snelling countered with a left, then Lewis with another left, and Snelling with a left to the body. No damage in any of those recent blows. There, Lewis shot a left to Snelling's jaw, and Snelling backed away. Lewis missed another one to Snelling. Then Snelling sent over a right hand that seemed to make Lewis's legs wobble, but Lewis rallied, and he's still in there. And Lewis is proudly Snelling to the ropes, and there was a hard exchange at close quarters, with Snelling driving over a hard right to Lewis's body. But Lewis follows him around the ring and keeps shooting that left hand once more. There, Lewis missed with a hard right uppercut that had plenty behind it. So far, I must say that Max Schmeling has taken every blow that Joe Louis can shoot at him with either hand. And I can't say quite so much for Lewis at this stage. But there, Lewis came in with a left hook to the body just above the belt, and it carried power. But Schmeling backed away and then shot hard right hands high on Lewis's jaw and made Lewis give ground. This is the greatest heavyweight fight we've seen in years. Right there in the center of the ring, Schmeling bobbing and weaving, trying to get away from Lewis. Lewis still with all that power, and he's got the power. No, but Schmeling brought over. Now, they're still trying to fight after the bell. They refuse to break.
Stay tuned for more of the 1936 Louis Schmeling fight from Yankee Stadium. Angelo Dundee and Bert Sugar return to ringside with analysis of Max's plan that doomed the Bomber. And later this hour, Joe Louis gets his chance at the title, taking on James J. Braddock, the rags to riches fighter who Russell Crowe played in the movie Cinderella Man. I'm Brian Kenny, and welcome back to ESPN Classics Ringside, Joe Louis from Gleason's Gym. The first Max Schmeling fight was one of the defining bouts of Lewis's career. Schmeling had knocked down Louis in the 4th round with a devastating right hand, and the former world champion had continued to pound away at the undefeated Louis with that devastating right-hand shot. It was a weary Joe Louis that answered the bell for the 10th round.
Clem, take it up the
And
bell.
here they are. Lewis late getting in. Lewis almost didn't get his mouthpiece in. And Schmeling is going on. And Lewis tried to back away. He caught Lewis napping here, fussing with that mouthpiece. Schmeling let Lewis have a hard right to the jaw, and Lewis stepped into a clinch. Lewis now led with a left and tried with a right. He pushed Schmeling away with his left, and at close quarters let Schmeling have a right to the jaw, a right uppercut to the jaw. There was another left hand by Lewis, low on Schmeling, and the referee cautioned him, and the crowd is booing Lewis. And now Lewis shot over a left to Schmeling's jaw, and Schmeling retaliated and is driving Lewis to the rope, fighting him with rights and lefts, with Lewis trying to tie Schmeling up. If Schmeling then let Lewis have a left to the face, a right to the face, and left and right. Lewis has practically no defense at this moment, but there he came through with a good hard right to Schmeling's jaw, just below the eye. And stepped back, and Schmeling let him have right and then left, and Schmeling missed with a hard right to Lewis's jaw, then straightened him up with a left, and backed away. And now in the center of the ring, Lewis is feinting at Schmeling with his left hand, and Schmeling trying with his left, and then backing away from Lewis's left. And there at close quarters, they exchange rights and lefts to jaw and body. Now in the center of the ring, Schmeling is right directly in the center, and he got over a left to Lewis's face there. The two fighters straightened each other up with left hands. Schmeling in the center, and he shot over a hard right to Lewis's jaw. Lewis took the punch and came back with a left hook to Schmeling's jaw, then a right hard on the head, and then Lewis missed with a very weak right hand that made Schmeling laugh despite his closed eyes. And then Schmeling stepped back, and Lewis tried to follow up with a left to the face and then a right. And now at close quarters, Schmeling missed with a right uppercut, and Lewis straightened out with a left hand. Then Lewis missed with a left hand. Schmeling tried with a good hard right, but Lewis was inside of it with his left and hit Schmeling on the jaw. Lewis followed up Schmeling and peppered him with left hands to the jaw, but Schmeling took them and tried to get in a right at close quarters. Lewis brought over a hard right to Schmeling's jaw, and Schmeling stepped into a clinch. Now in the center of the ring, Schmeling and Lewis are sparring. Lewis tried first with left and then with right, and Schmeling tried with left, and they both missed. Now, once Lewis is in the center of the ring, and Lewis shot a left hand that carried nothing, then Lewis hit Max twice, full in the face with his left hand. Schmeling shot that right hand to Lewis's jaw. Then at close quarters, they exchanged hard rights to the jaw. Now Schmeling in the center of the ring, and Lewis shot over a left overhand to the high on Schmeling, missed with a left. Lewis tried with left and right, and now in the center of the ring, they're sparring, and Lewis led out with a left that carried nothing. There's the bell.
Coming up, it's curtains for Joe Louis as Germany's Max Schmeling finishes off the Brown Bomber in a shocking upset at Yankee Stadium.
And Lewis is down. Lewis is down, hanging to the rope, hanging badly.
Later, Dick Gregory joins Angelo Dundee and Bert Sugar with the spectacle of the rematch, as Schmeling and Lewis find themselves center stage in a fight that crossed into the politics of Nazi Germany versus democracy. This is Ringside on ESPN Classic from Gleason's Gym in Brooklyn. Welcome back to Gleason's Gym. I'm Brian Kenny alongside Burt Randolph Sugar and Angelo Dundee. Ringside, Joe Louis. Once again, widely regarded as the best finisher in boxing history, Joe Louis looked indestructible until he faced Max Schmeling in 1936. Joe Louis answered the bell for the 12th round, facing defeat for the first time in his professional career.
And Lewis was slow coming out of his corner, trying to adjust the glove. Now in the center of the ring, Lewis standing there and feinting with his left hand. With his right, he is trying to cut off Schmeling's left hand. And Schmeling shot a hard right to the jaw, but Lewis was inside of it, and it did very little damage. Lewis in the center of the ring, Schmeling with his back to me, and Lewis forced into this corner. Schmeling dances back. His footwork is very much better than Joe's. Joe's is not only a shuffle tonight, but it's very slow, and very little of it. Now Lewis shot a left, but Schmeling stepped inside of it and gave Lewis a left to the jaw and missed with the right. Then they gave each other left hands to the face. No damage done. Now they're sparring once again. And again, Lewis shot in a left hook to Schmeling low under the belt. And Donovan cautioned Lewis, and Schmeling stepped back, and Donovan had to warn them to go on and fight. And Lewis, bewildered by Donovan's instructions, stepped into Schmeling there and let him have hard rights and lefts to the jaw, followed by a terrific right to the jaw. and he stepped into a clinch, and Donovan broke them. Now in the center of the ring, Schmeling got over a right to Lewis's jaw. Lewis in return gave Schmeling a hard left hand to the face and then a right. And once more Lewis is peppering Schmeling's eye, first with left and then with right. And Schmeling is stepping into clinches at every opportunity while Lewis is following him up with good short rights and lefts. And again, the referee had to break them. Schmeling in the center of the ring, Lewis following him up and lashing out with his left hand every now and then. And there was a hard left to Schmeling, but Lewis came back and gave Lewis a terrific right hand to the jaw. Lewis ducked, put up his gloves. Schmeling bent low and tried to bring up a right uppercut to straighten him, but he missed and came up on the side of Lewis's head. And then, at close quarters, Schmeling stepped back and shot a hard right hand to Lewis's jaw that landed flush and made Lewis step into a clinch. And Donovan broke them. Schmeling got over two more hard rights to Lewis's jaw and made Lewis give ground. And there Schmeling straightened up Lewis with hard rights and lefts to the jaw. He has puffed up Lewis's left cheek, and Lewis is down. Lewis is down, hanging to the rope, hanging badly. He is a very tired fighter. He is blinking his eyes, shaking his head. The count is done. The fight is over. The fight is over. And Schmeling is the winner. Lewis is completely out. They've had to lift him and carry him to his corner. And Joe Jacobs wants to put on a special fight of his own. He wants to fight anybody, but they're carrying Schmeling back to his corner.
So this is stunning. I mean, this is after, and you watch enough, and now if you're watching our boxing marathon, you get to see Joe Louis clearing house and cleaning out the heavyweight division, and now he gets destroyed, Bert. How does this happen?
Well, several things happened, number one of which is Max Schmeling had a plan, and his plan was simply to wait for Lewis to lower his left after he had jabbed. He would drop it. The second was to take anything and everything for the first rounds until he could throw that right. And how he did that was he held his left out, cupping it around his chin. So while Lewis was jabbing him, he couldn't get to the right hand to him. And he was closing Schmeling's eye, first round completely. Schmeling landed the right for the first time in the second round. It was to be the first of 54 right hands that landed flush. And Lewis remembered nothing after the fourth round.
Really?
He was knocked down. He said he remembered nothing. In fact, afterwards, somebody said, "Do you want to see the films of that fight again?" He said, "I saw the fight." But he really hadn't.
You know, Angelo, you watch fights, and if you watch the later fight, you see Schmeling doesn't have that same aura. But on this night, you know, a fighter he looks bigger than he really is, and Schmeling looked that part on this night. I mean, how strong, Bert mentions the right hand. It was a strong, tight right hand every single time out. What did you think of Schmeling on his best night here?
Well, his best night, he's doing a move on Joe, dipping. Now, when you got a guy dip, you tell your guy, take a walk to the right, get away from the right hand. And Joe, look at the shots. He's not taking the shot. He took shots from Bear right on the banana. He didn't budge. What a different Joe Louis. So every fight is different. Different guys fighting different guys. You never know what can happen in boxing. That's what's intriguing about it.
Yeah, you were telling us while we were, coming back here that sometimes a guy you say indestructible. Next time,
no,
right, not the same guy. And
No.
Joe Louis isn't. And also, we have to give credit, Max Schmeling isn't. Schmeling was magnificent on this night.
Schmeling fought the fight of his life. This was it. The Germans had thought that he had no business over there. Remember, this is the same year that the Olympics and their Aryan supremacy. He was going over to lose to a black man. All of a sudden, he became a national hero. He had beaten the black man. He had beaten Joe Louis.
Schmeling.
The words, the invincible. Look at him. He's jumping up and down. And what here happens is that Schmeling all of a sudden becomes a hero. Jimmy Cannon, who had gone to Detroit, as I'd made mention, to cover the Yankees' Western trip because of the new rookie named Joe DiMaggio, couldn't understand how in Joe Louis's hometown there were parades of cars celebrating Schmeling's victory by the white community. Think about that. I mean, that to me is astounding. Mm-hmm. But all of a sudden, Joe Louis was not invincible anymore. And yet, within the year, he would be heavyweight champion of the world.
Yet how did he react right afterwards? Again, the first time you take a loss, Angela, let me start with you. What is it, first time you take a loss?
What did Honest Bill Daly say?
Honest Bill Daly said he'd been playing around the afternoon of that fight, the Schmeling fight.
If Honest Bill Daly said it, it's true.
And yet they get him back in the ring in 2 months. They don't let him sit around and mull about this.
Didn't he go into hiding for a while?
A week or two, but they got him right back in. Right. Jack Blackburn just said, fight and fight.
Also had to recover from the beating. I mean, it was a physical beating that he took from this fight.
But it was also a psychological beating, and what you're doing is you're dealing with that. Get him right back into the ring against Sharkey. And Jack Sharkey had a great comment after that fight. He said, and he's the only man ever to fight Jack Dempsey and Joe Louis. He said, when Louis hit you, and he hit you hard, he said, sorry. When Jack Dempsey hit you, he said, how come you're not dead yet?
You bring up a point about Max Schmeling, Bert, in that, Schmeling was not yet, he was actually affiliated with the previous government in Germany and seen as a hero there. Now as the new government, as the Third Reich comes into power, he is not part of that yet, and but now he is being brought back in.
Embraced.
I think because now he's embraced because he's a national hero, and there are some means to him becoming a hero in Germany. And so he goes back on the Hindenburg,
yes,
Bert, and goes back as a hero. Yes. And it's difficult, and throughout his entire life, of course, he has to try to walk that line.
It's a tightrope that he never becomes a member of the National Socialist, better known as the Nazi Party. And yet he is an opportunist enough to take advantage of being a hero. And his manager was Jewish, Joe Jacobs. Better known as Yussel the Muscle, because he pushed out all the German backers. But Schmeling now is a hero, and everyone thinks that it's going to be Max Schmeling that's going to fight Jimmy Braddock.
It would seem to make sense.
I mean, Braddock had been champion since '35 and basically put away his championship for 2 years, listening to offers. He and Joe Gould, his manager.
Put it on ice, yeah.
Yes, I mean, he tucked it under his arm and went home. And everybody thought it was going to be Schmeling. Now comes the battle between Madison Square Garden and Mike Jacobs of 20th Century Sporting Club as to who gets Jimmy Braddock, whether it's the Garden with Schmeling or Mike Jacobs, who has Joe Louis with Louis. And now comes the fight, and Jacobs does it. He gives Joe Gould and Jimmy Braddock 10% of the earnings of Joe Louis for the next 10 years to get the fight in 37.
That's the sale price, yeah, which is quite a deal. All right, but first, of course, Joe Louis has to recover from the first loss as a professional and a bad beating from Max Schmeling. As Bert mentioned, Jack Sharkey, another former heavyweight champion, is up next. We'll have that for you next here on Classic Ringside, Joe Louis. Welcome back to Ringside, Joe Louis, our marathon celebration of the career of the longest reigning champion in the history of boxing. By mid-1936, Louis was the fast-rising star of the heavyweight ranks. But his loss to Germany's Max Schmeling on June 19th stunned the boxing world and Louis, too. His next fight came against another former world champion, Jack Sharkey. Sharkey had won the heavyweight belt from Schmeling in controversial fashion back in 1932 and lost the title to Primo Carnera just a year later. Sharkey had faced all the greats of the golden age of boxing, including Jack Dempsey. The Boston Brawler had seen it all in the fight game, but he knew he faced something special and fairly frightening in a revitalized Joe Louis. Sharkey once told a reporter, quote, "The lonesomest spot in the world is the center of the ring, after the bell is clanged to start the fight. Nobody but you and the referee and the other guy. The referee can't help you, and the other guy is there strictly to hurt you." Let's go out to Yankee Stadium, August 18th, 1936. Louis versus Sharkey.
Wearing purple trunks from Boston, weighing 197 1/4, former world heavyweight champion in a successful comeback campaign, who hopes to ultimately be privileged to meet the champion again in an effort to regain his lost laurels.
Jack Sharkey. And his very capable opponent, wearing red striped trunks, from Detroit, Michigan, weighing 199 3/4, who hopes by his performance this evening to again re-establish himself in the eyes of the boxing world as the outstanding contender for heavyweight championship honors, Joe Louis.
In their corners, their bell, and they enter the center of the ring. Sharkey with his hands well up. Joe slouching in as usual. Sharkey tries with the left, and they trade left. They circle in the center of the ring and stand cautiously. There's no rushing in trading. Sharkey tries. He's short with the straight left. Joe hits Jack with a right crossover, just like Schmeling hit him, but not an effective punch. Joe comes in with a straight right and a left to Sharkey's head, the right over it. He lands a left to Sharkey's body and a right chop to the chin and a right and a left to the body. Sharkey lands a right uppercut to Joe's face and to his body and a left hook to the side of his head, and they tangle. Side of the head, then a straight and a very hard right to the chin. He comes back in gamely with a right to the body, and they tangle. They're squaring off in the center of the ring, boxing with each other. Joe feints with his body. He feints again with his body. Jack short to the left. Joe tries with a wild right and misses. Jack weaves inside, lands the right hand to the body. They're standing close. Joe lands a left hook to the body and a right cross to the head and a right cross to the head and a right cross to the head. And he's laying Sharkey back over the rope. Very gamely, Jack pushes him out there in the center of the ring, squared off again. Sharkey's feinting with the body, but Joe doesn't fall. He's short with the left hand, trying to pull punches from Sharkey. They're both being very cautious. Now out in the center of the ring. Jack leads with a long left. Not but there he tries with a wild right and circles Joe's neck. He tries with an inside right hand uppercut in close, pushes Joe to the ropes. Arthur's down to the referee, pulls him back. Jack tries with the left and misses. Tries with the left hook and misses. The punch is really to keep Joe off or to draw a punch from him. Sharkey standing with his back against the rope. He weaves from the hips. Joe tries with the right and misses, but lands a short right follow-up. Puts Jack to the rope. Jack pushes him out to the center of the ring, puts his head under Joe's chin, and they're out in the center of the rope. The referee finds it unnecessary to break them. The boys are standing sparring for an opening in the center of the ring. Joe tries again with the left hook. Jack steps back. They're right over our heads here now. Joe tries with the left hook and lands an inside short right chop to the side of the head. They're clinched now right up the microphone. Joe is pushed back to the center of the ring by Jack Sharkey. Jack takes a straight left to the chin. They're sparring in the center of the ring for an opening. Joe's being very key. He lands a straight left to Jack's chin. Jack weaves inside, drops low, but takes a right hand from Joe. He pushes Joe against the ropes on the far side of the ring. Joe pushes him away, and they're sparring for an opening in the center of the ring. Joe is short with a straight left. They're sparring in the center of the ring under the microphone. He's short with a straight left. He lands the straight left to Sharkey's chin. Now Jack tries with the left again. He's short. He takes the light left to the face. He comes into a clinch and works on Joe's body. Right, left, and pushes Joe into the ropes at this corner. They're out in the center of the ring once more. He lands a straight left to Joe's face and takes a light left in return. He lands another left to Joe's eye. Joe lands a straight left. They're sparring now. Neither of the punches are very heavy. Jack feinted with his right hand, but Joe stepped back. There was no punch to land. Jack feinted again with his right hand, but Joe didn't step back. Jack lands a straight left, another straight left to the head. Not heavy punches. He's pulling some punches from Joe now. He's feinting very cleverly and very scientifically, weaving with the body and feinting with the hand. And he's doing a very fine job of it. Joe tried with the left and right to the head. Both punches misses. Jack drops inside, lays close on the chest. Arthur separates them. They're standing over our heads in the center of the ring, and Joe tries a right to the head and a left to the body, the latter landing at the chair. Very calm. They get the bell. They come to the center of the ring. Jack puts his hands up well in time. He wipes his nose cautiously, stands out in the center of the ring, feints again with that body, feints again with that body. Joe tries with a light left and misses. Jack feints again with the body, weaves with the head, swings from the hips. Joe is laying back, watching him for an opening. He tries with a very light left hook, doesn't mean he tries another left hook, and Jack lands a nice straight left to Joe's face. Now he's weaving there, and Joe Louis is a little puzzled by that weaving. Sharkey slips in under Joe and lands two rights to the body. They're in there nudging at each other now. Arthur Donovan splits them out. They're feinting there. Sharkey feints from the hips. Joe leads a straight left to Jack's chin, not a hard punch. Jack lands and returns a straight left. Jack takes the left, he takes another left coming in. Joe misses with a sharp uppercut. Joe hits a hook to the left ear, and they're in there trading punches now, right and left, but they miss. Jack lands a straight left to Joe's eye. They're back to the microphone here now, and Joe tries a very hard left, but Jack evades the punch by slipping underneath. In close, he lands a short left chop to Joe's head. He lands a straight left and takes a straight left. He slips under Joe's hands, and they go into a clinch. It's necessary to split them out. They're in the center of the ring, feinting. Watchfully, two fine athletes here. Joe tries with a long left. He tries from the long left to Sharkey's left eye, and it lands. Now they face. Jack throws the punch and makes Joe miss. He takes a light left of the head, flips inside Joe's hand. Tries to pummel with the right and left, but Joe's too clever and ties him up. They back to the rope the microphone. Joe tries with the vicious right and misses. He lands, however, a left hook to the head coming in and then a right to the side of the head. Jack takes the punches beautifully, pushes him out, and then takes a straight left to the face, another straight left to the face, and slides in the beautiful right-hand punch to the heart and a left to the head. And Joe lands a hard right to the chin and a left to the chin and misses a right and lands a terrific left hook on Sharkey's face. Jack's against the ropes, bent over. Oh, Joe Louis, left, right to Sharkey's head. Sharkey comes back with a beautiful left face. Now he's leading out a dangerous path. He's standing against the ropes and takes a terrific right and a knockdown. Sharkey's down 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Jack's on his knees, 7, 8. Jack getting up, 9. Jack up over the microphone here, and Joe Louis charges across the ring. He lands a terrific left to his body. Hits Sharkey with a right. Jack is waiting, takes a left to the chin, a left to the chin, a right to the head, and he's down. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Jack's on one knee, hang on the rope. 8, 9, he's up. From the neutral corner, charges across. He's measuring his man now. Jack is very game. He lands a left to Sharkey's face, a right to Sharkey's ear. Then Sharkey does a Leon arrow way across the ring. His legs are a little bit weak from that punch. He takes a left to the eye, a left to the face, a left to the eye, a bad right to the body, and a left hook to the face. He's against the ropes, coming out gamely, courageous. Takes a left and lands a left. He jabs to Lewis's cheek. He jabs again to Lewis's cheek, and Lewis misses with a wild left. Sharkey lands an inside right to Lewis's chin, a left hook to his face. This is a night that Sharkey's in, and he's fighting like a champion. A straight left to his face, and there's the bell. Well, here we are coming up to the third round. Lewis very calmly, Jack coming out very strong, very confident looking. This Barker and opening the center of the ring. Jack recedes from the attacking Brown Bomber. Looks like Lewis is coming back on that Brown Bomber title. Jack feints with his left, but taking for an opening. Jack is weaving, and it bothers Joe. Joe's being very careful. He lands a straight left and a hard right hand, and Sharkey's down against the rope. He's swung over the lower rope. The count. 4, 6, 7, 8. Jack is up again. Arthur Donovan, the referee, wipes off his gloves, and he faces the Brown Bomber, who comes in charging with his left hand extended and tries with a hard right. He hooks the left to Sharkey's chin, and Jack lands the left. Sharkey is hit. There he goes on the chin, and he's fallen before us over the microphone for another knockdown. He's sitting here, taking his mouth guard out, shaking his head. It doesn't look as though he may make it this time. He's 9, 10, and out.
The time, 1 minute, 2 seconds. Third round, winner is Lewis.
Now, Joe, you fought a different fight last night than usual.
Yeah, I fought more of a crowding fight than usual.
What was the idea?
Well, I had to go out and get him, so I made up my mind to go right on out and get him.
What about the third knockdown, Joe, when you had Sharkey over the ropes?
Boy, I thought I had him hung up for the night then.
Well, where you going now, Joe?
Oh, I got an idea. I'm going to see if I can get a rematch with Smelling.
Later on ringside, the Bomber exacts his revenge in Louis Schmeling 2. The clock strikes 12 for the Cinderella Man as Louis fights for the title against James J. Braddock. Social satirist Dick Gregory joins Bert Sugar and Angelo Dundee in discussing the impact of Joe Louis on the country and the civil rights movement. Plus, cartoonist Bill Gallo drops in to sketch the Brown Bomber. All ahead on Ringside.
Whom would you rather fight, Joe, Braddock or Schmeling?
Braddock.
You think Braddock will be easier?
Yeah, much easier in the championship, too.
Oh, that makes a difference.
Yeah, that makes a lot of difference.
Think Braddock will be harder than Bear?
No. Can't be much harder than Bear.
Mrs. Lewis, what did you think of your husband?
I thought he was grand.
Well, you didn't expect him to lose, did you?
No.
You knew it was all the time.
Yeah.
How about a nice big kiss and finish it? Yeah.
That won't happen.
Joe Louis was quick there with that reply. Brian Kenny back here at Gleason's Gym. It's ringside Joe Louis. And once again, with his loss to Max Schmeling in June of 1936, Lewis's seemingly inevitable run to the heavyweight title was derailed. But he bounced back, and from that loss 1 year later, June 22nd, 1937, he would get the shot at the title against James J. Braddock. It would take place at Comiskey Park in Chicago. The Cinderella Man, popular figure in boxing, Lewis describing him once as, quote, the best fighter, the gamest, the cleanest I've ever fought. The Cinderella Man putting his title finally on the line. We're back. Burt Randolph Sugar, Angelo Dundee. We're joined right now by a social commentator, activist, and comedian, Dick Gregory. Dick, great to have you here.
I started not to come here.
What's that?
I started not to come here. I'm 74, and I'm a baby compared to them. We went to lunch today. Now, here's when you know you're old. We went to lunch today, and Sugar ordered a 3-minute egg, and they made him pay in advance.
He still got it. Look at that. All right, so let's start off.
By expense, he's got it.
I don't mind being on with this young kid.
Let's start off, Bert, with where are we again with Max Schmeling, a convincing win over Joe Louis. Why doesn't he get the shot at Braddock?
It has nothing to do with Schmeling. It has to do with a fight for the control of boxing, really. Madison Square Garden was boxing back in the 30s.
Yes.
It was a mecca. It was everything. And to get it, the one element in this push-me-pull-you contest was the heavyweight champion. Days when there was one heavyweight champion, not like today, there's 4. And the heavyweight champion was James J. Braddock, who had won it under the aegis of Madison Square Garden, but there was a new entity over here, Mike Jacobs in 20th Century Sporting. And he had a contract with Joe Louis. So now it became, while Braddock put it on ice for 2 years, the heavyweight title, who would fight him? And the irony was it was Mike Jacobs, because while Schmeling is in New York for a fight that he's been signed to fight Braddock under the aegis of the Madison Square Garden Corporation, Jacobs and 20th Century have their man, Joe Louis, out in Chicago to fight that same week James J. Braddock, who shows up out there for one reason. Jacobs has given him and his manager, Joe Gould, 10% of Joe Louis's earnings for the next 10 years. That's enough to grease the skids.
That's quite a deal. Dick, the irony is that after so many fighters are frozen out because of the, it's not an official color line, but it is for a lot of fighters, especially in this era, here's Joe Louis getting his shot at the title. How important was that for the country at large and the black community?
I think one of the things, we cannot really see that until you go back to the whole Jack Johnson era and the white women and that whole racist thing in people's head when they see a fight. And so in one respect, Max Schmeling helped that whole black thing by the whole Nazi thing and the whole German thing. So all at once, for the first time, a black person in a ring become the white hope.
He was our hero.
He was the hero.
Right.
You know, and so when you, but you have to think about what happened to a Braddock and a Louis and them coming back behind, because they was the first ones they let through after Jack Johnson. Now, what instructions did they have? You know, what behavior pattern did they have? And then you go in. Now, I'm born during the Louis era. No television. You can't understand what Louis meant in the black community. There's no words to put it together. One day someone will do the research and say, here's what happened. Let me tell you what happened in the black community. There's implements. You have the horse, then the automobile, then the airplane, and now we got rockets. Well, the civil rights movement was the same way. You had the Joe Louis, certain thing happened. Then Jackie Robinson, a certain thing happened. Then the lynching of the little black youth, Emmett Till. And then Rosa Parks, then King. Now, without that order, each time we walked a little bit straighter. When Joe Louis came through, I mean, everything stopped in the black community. We sit around the radio, the old folks and the young folks, and shh, you don't make no noise. And the old folks is praying. This is their man. Because of, he represented black folks, his mannerism, his niceness, the way he smiled, the whole thing, and the force. And when the fight was on, it didn't start till it was over. Everybody hit the street. Hit the street. We had bathtubs, little tin tub, beating on them, marching. And I usually describe Joe this way. We never had enough money in our house for nothing. Back then, I thought good nutrition if the ribs didn't run out till you got enough, and bad nutrition is when they did. In my house, there was never enough peanuts until the Joe Louis fight. When Joe Louis fought, the peanuts never ran out. This is something inside of you. Look, I saw black folk go take a bath before the fight. You know, and we didn't have that. We had a little tin tubs. They dressed up.
Just to listen on the radio?
To listen on the radio.
We're going to talk more about this, of course, after the win. But first, Angelo, again, now Braddock is still the champ. Lewis gets his shot. You have watched a lot of tape of James J. Braddock getting ready for Cinderella Man. You're doing the choreography. What did you see in James Braddock?
Oh, I saw a smart, calculating, good boxer. Smart, set you up. I seen Braddock studied his style naturally. But he was a smart, slick guy. Wouldn't take shots, would offset you, step over on you, bing. He had so many good qualities, and it was easy for me to take it on.
Here it is against Max Baer winning the title. Yeah.
You know, a little guy beating on a big guy with a jab. That was a good fighter.
Max Baer having a good old time in there, Bert.
Well, he was a poser. He just loved this. I mean, he wasn't the villain as he was portrayed to be in Cinderella Man. He's just clowning his way through, busy losing a championship.
Yes.
That's just another day at the office. And here's Braddock. The improbable has happened. The Depression Man has come to the top. He's the everyman. But now Lewis is signed to fight him. And the interesting point is somebody asked Joe Louis afterwards, but this relates back, when did you think you were going to beat Braddock? He said, when I signed the contract.
And yet, it was a pretty good fight.
Oh, it was.
It was a competitive fight. So let's get to that right now. Again, after the maneuvering between Mike Jacobs, Lewis gets his shot at the title. So let's go to it right now. Comiskey Park, Chicago, June 22nd, 1937. Right now, a special presentation of this historic contest. At the time, of course, as Dick mentioned, most fight fans didn't watch the fight. They listened to the fight on the radio. So here's Clem McCarthy and Ed Hill's radio call with the newsreel footage that the world would see later on.
And just wait that still, and here they come. Joe shuffling out as usual. Jim Braddock stepped out fast, and he let go with a hard right hand, but Joe Louis was back of it and got away to his corner. There's a fast exchange at close quarters, and Louis got in a good left hook to Jim Braddock's jaw. Braddock pushes him against the rope. Now the referee, Tommy Thomas, broke them, and they're out there in the center of the ring sparring. And Jim Braddock is going to carry the fight. I imagine he just lashed out with the left, but Louis caught him with a hard left to the face and crossed with the right to the jaw. And Braddock got both punches, but he took them and stepped into a clinch. Now he sat there grim, and Joe lashed out with that left hand that he used to use when he first came into the professional ring that was so effective. He hit Braddock with the just end, and he hit him again with it, but Braddock is not giving any ground. He is carrying the fight to Louis. Louis let go with both hands, and he landed it at Braddock's jaw and a left to the body. Now then, once more this sparring, and Louis is watching carefully, ready, and Louis is trying for a killing punch. He let Braddock have a fast left, and then crossed up with his right and hit him high on the cheek. Now it's close quarters. Louis is pressing hard, and he went down, but didn't stay down. And Braddock is pounding into the rope. Braddock is the man forcing the fight in the corner, exchanging right and left. Braddock is letting him have right and left. They're tied up. The referee separated them. Braddock let him have a left. Braddock hasn't given any ground. Lewis is fighting desperately. Braddock let him have a left there and then a right to the body. Lewis once more with a terrific right to Braddock's jaw and the bell. And Braddock to his corner, looking good. And now they're out there in the center sparring. Lewis painting with the left, but Braddock refuses to lead. There, Lewis, each of them led, and each was short with that left lead. Now then, once more, and Braddock caught him with the left hook, but missed with the right. And there, Lewis stepped in with the right and left the face and jaw. And they went into a light clinch, and the referee separated them. Lewis stepped back. Braddock is once more carrying the fight to him, and that eye is on this side, looks a little bit there on Braddock's left eye, and there Lewis brought up a fast right uppercut that caught Braddock, but didn't shake him. A good sharp left to Braddock's face, but Braddock didn't give ground. He's in the center of the ring, and there he let Lewis have a left hook to the jaw, and Lewis countered with a hard right to the face. Lewis is turning loose with right and left, both hardest right and most hardest left. Flushed on Braddock's jaw. Lewis is getting now with his right uppercut right at the bell. A hard right uppercut, and that took right Lewis is down toward the end. might be a real right and left here at any instant. Braddock tried once more, and Lewis beat him to the punch and got in a left jab to the face. He has marked Braddock's face up a little bit. The eye is slightly cut, and there Lewis came in with a good left hook to the body, and Braddock missed with a hard right swing. They came into a clinch, and at the command of the referee, they separated quickly, and Braddock is once more in the center of the ring. He tried with a right and missed. Lewis tried with a left, and Braddock tied him up in the clinch. The referee, didn't have to even signal the break. They broke of their own accord, and Lewis tried with a left as they came out of that clinch. Then Lewis let him have a left to the face, and Braddock came over with a right, but Lewis was going back on the punch, and Lewis gave Braddock a straight left jab to the face. And Braddock followed up, and there Braddock cut him a right uppercut that Lewis felt. And Braddock is now forcing Lewis back across the ring, but Lewis countered with a good hard right to the jaw. In the center of the ring once more, Braddock's eye is slightly cut, right just across the bridge of his nose, but it isn't affecting. And there Lewis gave him a hard right at the bell, but Braddock rode the punch. Once more, Lewis gave him a left to the face. Braddock was short with the left, and Lewis was a little light with the left. And then Lewis jabbed him 3 times in succession with the left. And then Lewis came with a left and then a right to the face that was good and hard. And there he hit Braddock a good square smash on the face with his right hand and damaged that eye again. And there's another one that made Braddock give ground. Another hard right by Lewis to Braddock's jaw. At close quarters, Lewis is trying with right and left. The referee separated them. Lewis is getting in effective work now with his right, a straight right, and he's showing its effect on Braddock. Braddock has looked in bad shape by now, the worst I've seen him. Lewis is driving, it looks like just a moment, and Lewis is showing that power and precision. This is right and left. Lewis there got in a left to the right to the body, and there was a left hook right above the belt. It must have done it. Braddock is fighting harder, gamer than I've ever seen. I don't know how long he can last, because Lewis is rising him terrifically with his right hand. I've never seen Lewis's right hand better. Braddock is trying with his left. Lewis is watching the chance. There was a left hook by Lewis to Braddock's body, and he missed with the right. The referee separated them, and Braddock has let with a go with a straight left to Lewis's face. And right at the bell, Lewis missed with the left, and Lewis went back to his corner. And the markings will not keep him from staying in there and fighting. It'll be a question entirely of how long his legs can stand up, or on how much body punishment he can stand, and whether Lewis can plant a good knockout punch on either body or jaw. And now, Braddock in the center of the ring, and Lewis led there with a left and missed. Braddock was back out of the way. Braddock led with a left and came over with a right that was a little short, and then Lewis missed with the left, and so did Braddock. Braddock now gave Lewis a left in the face, and Braddock gave him, Lewis gave Braddock a hard left hook in return, and there Braddock drove a left to Lewis's body, and Lewis slipped over a good hard left to Braddock's head, and then a left on the back of Braddock's head. But don't make any mistake, it wasn't far enough back to be out of line. It was right over the ears, I should say under the ears, and there Braddock came up with a right uppercut that missed. Lewis is back out of the way in time. Now Braddock's in the center of the ring, and Lewis gave him, Braddock is down. Six, 7, 8, 9, 10. A new world champion. Joe Lewis is the new world champion in the 8th round. Braddock went down from a hard right to the jaw. A succession of blows, of left to the body, right to the jaw. And the crowd is in the ring. And I'm going to turn it over to Ed Hill while I go catch Joe Lewis.
Clem, get us in that ring. I'll take charge from now on. Over in Joe Lewis's corner, they're having a jollification. The seconds threw their arms around him and hugged him, while Jimmy's seconds gathered around him and lifted him from the floor, wiped the blood from his face, and carried him over to his corner.
The winner and new champion of the world, Joe Lewis.
So Joe Lewis is now the heavyweight champion of the world. Before we talk about the effect, let's talk about the fight. And this is great where on this show we get to see the actual fight. Fans get to see it. And Braddock, very skilled guy. This was not some sort of easy fight to the title for Joe Lewis.
Braddock's camp had decided they were going to try the same thing Schmeling had. Use the right hand. If Lewis was susceptible then, he's going to be susceptible a year later. Use the right hand. And Braddock had a good right hand. And you can see him missing about 3 of them and then popping Joe. And Joe goes down, as much off balance, but he's hurt a little bit. He bounces up at 3. jumps skip to his corner afterwards. He goes back at the end of the first round, and his trainer, Jack Blackburn, Chappie, says, "Son, stay down till 9. You can't jump up so fast nobody knows you're down. Not down." He got hit. And Braddock was in it for a couple rounds.
Right. The effect then, Dick? What's the effect of Joe Louis being the heavyweight champion?
I think you have to go back first. There was no television. This was radio. Now, people got television in every room. There was only one radio, and everybody pooled their money together and called the folks at the radio company to make sure that it worked, make sure the fuse was okay. And then you didn't turn it on all day. You turned it on a little bit before to hear him talk about the fight, and everybody got quiet. And you listened to the fight, and then the next thing is go to the movie, because they would show it in the movie a week later. And there was a lot of black folks didn't believe in the movies, but they wanted you to come back and tell them, what did it look like? Was it really this? Was it really this? Because remember, Joe Louis to black folks was nothing but a voice. He was a voice. Right. You heard him on the radio. He never said that much.
An image in your head.
I'm sure glad I win. I had another lucky day. But the black press is the one that all they talked about was Joe Louis and the dignity and all of the civil rights movement. He was the one that would go. He was there speaking for the NAACP in the Urban League. We didn't know Joe Louis had horses, that he rode horses. The black press told us. And then he would come to town and you would line up. You would line up to see him because he wasn't just a fighter to us. He was the biggest, hottest thing going.
And representative of the community?
The whole thing.
Yeah, a representative of the country, a huge star, nationally, internationally.
He represented the country too. Then he represented us. He represented us.
And the Peanuts.
And the Peanuts.
And the Peanuts never run out.
Never ran
out. He starts the title defense. That is the greatest title run of all time, 25. And Tommy Farr is next in August of 1937.
But already we know Louis's punching power again. We had lost count of that in the Schmeling fight. What happened was, Braddock said, I couldn't have gotten up for $1 million. He said his left jab was like an electric light bulb exploding in my face. So now he goes out in his first defense, Tommy Farr, a Welshman, Empire champion. And he puts up a heck of a fight, albeit I'm now told that on British radio, BBC, they had him winning 17 of the first 15 rounds. He was always described as gallant, and this, and that, and everything else. And Louis was there. Louis couldn't explode anything for Farr, who was a tough guy. And he goes the whole 15 rounds. But Tommy Farr would later attest to Louis's power by saying, and this was years later, every time I mention the name Joe Louis, my nose starts to bleed.
So Joe Louis takes out Tommy Farr. Let's listen in. Let's both fighters after this fight again. More stuff from the archives here. Let's go back in time right after the fight. Joe Louis and Tommy Farr.
He was very tough. I thought I had him in the 7th round, but the bell saved him. So I hope that the fight smell in October.
Well, I think it's a great fight and a very clean fight and a very hard fight. And I hope that all the ones that seen it, they enjoyed it as much as I did. Because I enjoyed every minute of it.
Were you hurt?
Yes, I was hurt plenty, as these two eyes will show you.
Do you hope to fight Louis again?
I hope to fight him for the championship again next year, and I think I'll be the new champion.
Next on Ringside, Bert Sugar sits down for a conversation with Joe Louis's son, Joe Louis Barrow. Barrow explains how the Ku Klux Klan had a role in Joe Louis discovering boxing. The family migrating to Detroit after a confrontation with the racist organization. Bert and Barrow will also examine why Chappie, trainer Jack Blackburn, had the perfect pedigree to shape Louis into a champion. And later, the Brown Bomber clears out the heavyweight division. Ringside analysis of the rematch against Max Schmeling, plus the battles with two-ton Tony Galento and the Pittsburgh Kid, Billy Conn. Brian Kenny back here at Gleason's Gym alongside the Brooklyn waterfront. While Joe Louis was a hero to millions and almost always made himself accessible to his fans, few people knew him intimately. One man who did was his son, Joe Louis Barrow Jr. He wrote the book Joe Louis, 50 Years an American Hero. Bert Sugar sat down with Barrow to gain his unique perspective on his father.
Joe, welcome. It's nice to have you here. To fill in some blanks, I've got to tell you, your dad is one of the most storied people in American history, not just boxing. And yet, there are gray areas. He moved from Alabama to Detroit. Well, he didn't move. Right. His mother moved and brought him with him.
Yes.
Fill us in. What happened then? How did he get there, and what was it like in Detroit as a young kid?
His parents moved up from Chambers County because of the segregation that was going on in the South. He was part of the entire black migration from the South to the North because that's where the jobs were. And that's where there was opportunities. There was tremendous prejudice. In fact, the reason they moved is that a friend of my grandmother's second husband was very ill, and they went over to a part of the county, and on their way back, the Ku Klux Klan stopped them. And they were in their hoods, and fortunately, one of the Klansmen knew Pat Brooks. And he basically said, I know him, let him go, because he's a good nigger. At that point, he decided that his family was leaving the South and that they were going to go to the North.
Now they're in Detroit, and your dad is a little kid.
Yes.
And I'm trying to figure out how he becomes a boxer, because I know that your grandmother bought him a violin.
Yes.
A violin.
She wanted her kids to be very cultured, and part of culture is playing an instrument. So she wanted my father to play the violin. And so he was given 25 cents a week to go to his violin lessons. And his good friend, Thurston McKinney, decided that his good friend, Joe Louis, was too strong and too powerful to be playing the fiddle. So Thurston actually conned him into coming over to the Brewster Recreation Center, and that's where he started boxing. And he would take that 25 cents, Bert, and he'd use it to rent the locker each week. And at the end of the day, she was not very happy with his boxing career, but she said, if that's what you want to do, then you should be the very best you can be. And as it turns out, he was the very best he could be.
Now he goes to the Brewster gym.
Yes.
And he enters Golden Gloves and all of these Detroit City tournaments.
Right.
He's still Joseph Louis Barrow.
Right.
At what point did this ex-violin player become Joe Louis?
Well, he was registering for a Golden Gloves bout, and it was a very small registration card, and he was trying to get Joe Louis Barrow on the card. And all he could get was Joe Louis, and the person taking the registration says, just use Joe Louis, it's just a name, it won't matter. But my father was pretty easygoing, Bert, and you know, he just went with the tide, and Joe Louis was it.
Well, now the question becomes, he becomes a champion, light heavyweight, then heavyweight champion, Golden Gloves, and he turns pro, but he turns pro under the aegis of two gentle persons, one from Chicago and one from Detroit.
Well, first of all, John Roxborough found him in Detroit, and he partnered, as you said, with Julian Black, but his trainer, Jack Blackburn, Chappie, was in Chicago. Also, Chicago was a bigger fight town than Detroit, and they just figured that they could get more fights, he could have more attention, there was more press there, and that was a better home for him to launch his career.
Now, Jack Blackburn is training at George Trafton's gym, and had trained Bud Taylor and Sammy Mandel, two champions. And yet he doesn't want your father because he doesn't feel that there's any future in a black heavyweight. How did they get Blackburn, who had been one hell of a fighter, how did they get him to take Joe Louis now?
Well, they ended up giving him a percentage of the purses. That was the final straw. Because Chappie didn't think my father had any talent. And so he didn't want him, and I think you're absolutely right, that he didn't want to get tied down to a black fighter who would never, ever get a chance at the heavyweight champion. But eventually, those two individuals, my father and Jack Blackburn, became very, very close.
A father figure, dare I say?
Almost a father, yes. Clearly a father figure. He respected my dad. He really believed in him at some point. And I really think he filled that major void of some male figure who really related to my father and was inside with my father. It was a wonderful relationship.
We'll be back later on Ringside with more from Joe Louis Barrow Jr. on his father, Joe Louis.
Coming up next, it's one of the most famous fights in sports history. The 1938 Louis Schmeling world title fight from Yankee Stadium. And later, more landmark Louis bouts, including the Billy Conn title bout that symbolized the great champion's resiliency. The Pittsburgh Kid had the Brown Bomber on the ropes, but Louis turns the tide with one shot. And the memorable Jersey Joe Walcott fights. Plus, Louis at his punishing best against the game Tony Galento. This is ESPN Classics Ringside, Joe Louis.